It's Saturday. Yes, there's less than a week to go. I'm back in the northeast. I'm here in Sedgefield today with Dr. David Bull, who's the Brexit Party candidate here. Well, I wonder. I look at these newspapers, you see. I look at the fact that I'm coming under constant daily attack. It means we must be doing quite well. And yes, we are doing quite well. We are challenging very strongly in some of these seats. We really have got a chance of winning some of them. Overall, the Labour vote's a little bit firmer than it was before, and that is a direct switchover from people who said that they were going to vote Liberal Democrat. My theory, I still think that on Thursday they are not going to turn out in droves to vote Labour. I also see the weather forecast for next Thursday. Now, that can change, obviously, but it's not looking very good. So I still think relatively low turnout, small Conservative majority, and I believe with the Brexit Party voice to try and keep Boris honest. Last night we had the last head-to-head leaders debate between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson. There were a couple of sparky points, but generally it was repetitive. It was let's get Brexit done over and over and over, and in answer to almost every question. And from Jeremy Corbyn, it was, for the many, not the few. And I watched it with a couple of people who are interested in politics, perhaps not quite as involved as I am, and they just thought it was boring. And I wonder whether actually what we're seeing in this campaign are two people vying to be Prime Minister who are just playing it safe. I say that, of course, 2 days after my interview with Andrew Neil. Boris is steadfastly refusing to do it. Andrew Neil had a right go at him over it.
Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister. We have been asking him for weeks now to give us a date, a time, a venue. As of now, none has been forthcoming. No broadcaster can compel a politician to be interviewed, but leaders' interviews have been a key part of the BBC's primetime election coverage for decades. We do them on your behalf to scrutinise and hold to account those who would govern us. That is democracy. We've always proceeded in good faith that the leaders would participate, and in every election they have, all of them, until this one. It is not too late. We have an interview prepared, oven ready, as Mr. Johnson likes to say.
So I did my 28 minutes or whatever it was with Andrew Neil. I think it was fine, but hey, you can watch it, you can judge it. So not long to go, and an election that maybe it will produce a few surprises. Ray says to me on Facebook, come to the north, grab the opportunity to change the system and drain that London swamp. Ray, I'm in the north. What more can I do? And Wanda says, we stand by you in Holland. Well, yeah, I know there are some in Holland who are looking forward to Nexit, and we're also aware that the feeling that the Brussels system of government is wrong is shared by tens of millions of people right across Europe. And of course, there's no great surprise as well. Leanne sarcastically says to me, Labour will be offering us free puppies as well soon. I think it's iPhones first, Leanne. No, I think he will offer free iPhones at some point next week. Everything is going to be free. Isn't it going to be wonderful? I don't think many people really believe him, and I think we are the ones doing Labour a lot of damage. And when you read this tosh in the newspapers about splitting the vote, actually there are seats in which the Conservatives are competing only because we've ripped a big chunk into that Labour vote. And when it comes to split the vote, well, what about the seats where we're the key challenger and the Conservatives are still standing, still putting out leaflets? In many ways, they're the ones who risk splitting the Leave vote. So not long to go, and I'm going to have a chat right now with Dr. David Bull, known to some of you, famous television doctor turned... Well, I'm not quite sure whether you're a politician, David.
Well, I know.
I was almost a term of insult to call you a politician. But David, who I cold called him earlier this year, knowing that he was a good media performer, knowing that he was a very strong believer that Brexit was the right way forward for this country. And I cold called him, and he's an MEP for the Brexit Party and now standing here. David, good morning.
Good morning.
And thanks for joining us. Very interesting, our first visit today. We went to a factory, and there were three businessmen there. One, a builder, who said we flooded the market with Polish builders. They all worked jolly hard and were nice people, but it drove down wages, and it meant lots of youngsters no longer training to to be bricklayers or other things and just going off to university to do social sciences. Secondly, the haulier, who made the point, costs him £4,500 a year to insure his truck. His Polish competitors pay 600 quid a year, pay their drivers £2 an hour. They come into the country and stay here often for months, competing directly with him for the same business. And the third, the metal fabricator, delightful guy. And we're going to show some clips of that in a moment, of the factory, making the point that, huge amounts of work for these offshore wind farms that are being built in the North Sea, big offshore wind farms that are being built, and the work's being sent off to Germany, being sent off to Denmark. How did you, there were 3 guys there, all self-start-up, all, I think one had borrowed 10 grand from his mum to set the business up.
Worked all hours.
How do we, David, what do we do? How do we help people like this?
Well, I think there is such a sense of frustration. These people have worked incredibly hard to build these businesses, and they feel completely isolated. There is no help from government. There is nowhere they can go for that seed funding capital. And Alan, who runs that steelworks, was saying, he borrowed that money. He worked all the hours that he possibly could to build that, and yet every time he goes for a contract, his legs are cut out from under him. So it's not as though he can even get British business. So we need to ensure that actually, if you've got offshore turbines being built, they should be built in this country. It has to be that way, because he's got this big steelworks that you've seen, and it's empty. And it's empty.
Well,
and he put in all that infrastructure before, because he obviously had to tender for the contract. So again, capital outlay, building that huge facility, and suddenly he doesn't get the contract.
We do get back a bit here, don't we, to the European Procurement Directive.
We do.
Which affects, and interesting, isn't it, how Ursula von der Leyen, the new Juncker, well, nobody could quite be like Juncker, but how she's making the point that she actually wants European defence procurement to become even tighter. Boris, of course, not telling us, just won't tell us whether he wants to leave the European Defence Union or not. But all the way through to the National Health Service. Because I wanted to tease this out with you, because it's very interesting. Corbyn keeps saying we must not privatise the health service.
Well, he's already done it.
Now, of course,
Yeah.
It was Labour, appalling PFI deals. Labour, dirty hospitals. We know all of that. But what I thought was very interesting is Henrik Overgaard Nielsen, one of our colleagues and a former boss of the British group of dentists, making the point that actually already we have Australian companies, American companies running chunks of the health service, which they've done through European subsidiaries who under European procurement directives are able to tender for the business. No one talks about this. Why?
No. By law, of course, if you put out a tender, it has to go out to all countries in the European Union. Of course, that means that actually, and Labour is, and I think it's disingenuous to say that, under Labour we'll keep it state-owned and state-run. Well, it isn't. So the privatisation that is already there, the model is already there, and we have been very clear that what we want to do is to ensure that care remains free at the point of need, that we will stop any further privatisation and take stock of where we are. Some bits work well, and some bits don't. And we need to really think very carefully about that. I think there's a whole host of other things going on, because sometimes with these private companies, they cherry pick, you see, because if you take nice discrete operations, say, for example, you know what your workflow is. You get them in, you get them out, there are no complications. If there are complications, who picks that up? The NHS?
No, I get that point. I do actually fully understand and get that point. It's the same for all private medicine too, isn't it? If it goes wrong, often the NHS.
And that's wrong. And I have a really fundamental problem with the fact that private healthcare companies are using GPs, which are paid for by us, as their triage service. That's got to stop. And also, we've talked about this before, about those that possibly can afford private care.
Yes, I've believed in this for years.
I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
The fact is, yes, of course, you'll still have to pay into national insurance, which funds part of the health service. But if you want to have this other private healthcare running alongside, then why not? Because we reduce the burden of care.
So, but all this rubbish. If Keir Starmer's vision comes into being, and Labour keep us in the European Union, or at least inside, the single market rules, the European Procurement Directive will continue to apply to the National Health Service, and private companies will continue to be able to tender. These are some of the truths that never ever get talked about. David, universal credit.
Yes.
Ian Duncan Smith, who I think did, after a very torrid time as Tory leader, but did genuinely go around the country, look at some of the problems of poverty. He tried in his mind, I think, to get people off benefit and back into work, and quite right too. Took a very complex system.
Very.
six different benefits, rolled them into one in universal credit. So the theory actually was quite good, but in practice, what are you seeing on the ground
it doesn't
here?
work. And I mean, I've had meetings here, and what you're hearing time and time again is, yes, actually they understand the idea of simplification, that all the benefits come together, but they haven't thought through the practicality. So one lady was just telling us that basically because it's backloaded, she has no money. So she's expected to live for 6 weeks on no money. And this is a lady who's never been in debt, and the system is forcing her to take out a loan, which, by the way, they have punitive interest rates on repayment,
I bet
and
they
it
do.
gets worse and worse and worse. And not only that, what does it say? What does that do to your own spirit, and the sense of self-worth? And essentially what it does is it pushes you down into that spiral. I've seen kids who are actually getting food out of food banks and out of bins because there's no money. Now, IDS, I do agree with you. I think is well-meaning. Yeah,
The intentions were good. The practice isn't. Something else in broken Britain that isn't working. And by the way, so much in this country is actually broken in terms of our system of government, the way the polling industry works. I will be writing a book very shortly after this election called Broken Britain, where I will go through my first-hand experience in this campaign of so much of what I've seen and to try and put forward some alternative recipes. How are you going to do next Thursday, David?
What I can tell you is that I've been here for many, many weeks now. There is no doubt. I can literally count on one hand the number of people voting Labour. This is a staunchly patriotic, tribal Labour constituency in the past. People whose grandparents voted Labour, parents voted Labour. They're not voting Labour.
There we go. Heard it from the horse's mouth. Although candidates are always very optimistic.
Well, that may be true.
No, you've got to be.
That may be true.
You've got to be. But I repeat the point I made at the beginning of this broadcast. A lot of people who are telling pollsters they might vote Labour just won't be bothered on a rainy Thursday to walk down to the local primary school. That is my view. Over and out. See you in a couple of days.